read the description that Ian wrote for the newsletter because I think it's as concise a description of the problem we face today as anything I've read. So if you bear with me for a minute, this was in the HASP newsletter. Local newspapers are disappearing, and the trustworthy news coverage that communities need for civic and economic health is disappearing with them. Consolidation and digitization strategies are replacing essential local stories with more clickable national headlines. The Fifth Estate continues to face a barrage of attacks, and the once stable pillar of democracy's infrastructure is crumbling. How can a government of the people, by the people, and for the people survive without an informed electorate, especially in an era of rampant misinformation? So, Sarah, I'd like to start with you on a more or less personal note. You manage not only the Holland Sentinel, but 11 other newspapers around the state. How in the world do you do it? It would drive me nuts. And how did you get into this fix?
Well, it wasn't necessarily by choice. Well, it started with some downsizing in the middle, in the teens, when, the natural contraction with the economy, there's job losses in all different industries, and media is no different. And when they cut costs, they tend to cut people, and because they are the costliest thing. And so that's how I came to be the editor of the Ionia paper in 2017. And then there was a person who was managing my northern collection of papers, which is Petoskey, Charlevoix, Gaylord, Sheboygan, and Sault Ste. Marie. He left in the summer of last year, and it was easier to not replace him, more cost effective, and they thought, well, we're all working from home, and you seem to be doing okay, so you can do this, right? And then that was really my first that really opened my eyes to how all of this might potentially work. I learned a lot of what to do, what not to do. And then, unfortunately, in 2 months ago, we had another round of layoffs again. And then this time I became the editor of the Sturgis, Hillsdale, and Coldwater papers, and am now technically overseeing Monroe and Adrian, although they do still have their editor there. So that's how I came to be in this position. How I do it, I actually don't in the traditional sense. I work with a lot of people in all of these markets. I am kind of jumping around to different newsrooms day to day. It's highly structured. It's very regimented. Mm-hmm. I have to meet with 3 separate newsrooms every single day to learn about what they're working on, and I try to leverage my experience and wisdom as much as it's worth to the reporters about what they're working on and making sure that they're asking the right questions and thinking about the right things, but then I have to move on to the next thing shortly after that, and then other people see it through to execution. So that is technically how everything works day to day.
Wow. Ben, you're in the newspaper business for many years. You were Sarah's predecessor at the Sentinel. Before that, you ran the Lakeshore Bureau, the Grand Rapids Press. You were well thought of by your colleagues in the journalism profession. Why did you leave?
Well, the job Sarah just described scared me. It is an all-consuming job to edit one paper, let alone a dozen. You hear a siren going down the street and you think, oh, should somebody be out covering that? And I was getting on in years, approaching that magic age, and thought, time to slow down. I had some other opportunities to do some freelance work and so on. That's the easy answer. It's time to move on. Also, though, I knew the world was changing rapidly. Those of us who enjoyed the newspapers of the 80s and 90s, I think it was the golden age of newspapers. They were making money. We had 2 full-time newspapers in Holland with the Lakeshore Office of the Press and the Holland Sentinel. We had every meeting covered, dozens of reporters on the ground. But obviously that isn't happening anymore since the internet and the decline of newspapers. And it needed someone younger and maybe smarter to hand the baton to. So it was time to move on and let somebody else invent the next reality, which is what we're here to talk about.
Sarah, the first section I turn to in the paper every morning is the opinion section. Letters to the editor, the columns, they're called Your Turn now. They used to be called My Take.
I actually still call them My Take, but the designers change it.
Oh, okay.
I'm a creature of habit.
Calm, huh?
Yeah.
I see the editorial page, the opinion section, as a community forum, where local residents can exchange ideas and opinions about issues, national and local. Without the Sentinel, how would we have this kind of mechanism, this kind of forum to exchange ideas with our neighbors?
I think that really the only other option without community newspapers to provide that forum is social media, and we've seen how well that's worked out. I'm very passionate about the opinion page. I always have been, even now. I personally curate all of the opinion content for all of the papers that I manage because I don't want anybody else to touch it. I think that that's something that newspapers should be a little bit more, that they should be a little bit more respectful of it because of the fact that we are literally the only forum that provides this discourse in a civilized manner, in a vetted manner, where there is time taken, and it's not just in the heat of the moment, and it's not just an insult, and you have some sort of a mediator that is able to filter out some of the vitriol. I think that if we ever lose that, then that would be a huge blow to democracy in general.
Ben, you've been in the journalism business for a long time. What do you see for the future of the print media? I mean, not just in Holland, but West Michigan generally.
I think there is a role, a place for it. I sure hope there is. It needs to evolve. I think focusing on more analysis. Obviously, the breaking news of the minute is going to be on the internet. It's going to be on the television. It's like sports scores. You don't really go to the newspaper anymore for the scores if you're watching ESPN. But you can get the behind the scenes, the analysis, talk to people, and so on. Those kinds of more thoughtful, shall we say, and in-depth pieces, I think newspapers can provide, print media of some form, whether it's... But I also think in Holland, it's always been my belief since working here that it's a unique community that could support a daily newspaper. Between the size of the community, it has its own, it's got the college, it's got its own arts, its music, it's small enough geographically that you can do it, whereas something like Grand Rapids, you've got too many schools, too many government bodies, too large of an area to cover. Holland, I think, is a perfect size for a daily newspaper where you can have a connection to a community and promote that kind of discourse as well.
Sarah, what do you see for the future of print journalism here?
Well, I think that the print, before the conversation was much more about what is the digital versus print, what's the future of media. I think that we're very much past that conversation now, where digital is the present, so it's no longer a thing about what the future will hold. Print is now sort of falling in decline, and digital has eclipsed it. I think print still will have a presence much longer than people give it credit for, but they just have to start thinking about it in a different way. Like to Ben's point, it's going to become more of a niche product. It's going to be more thoughtful, longer pieces that will probably be anchored on a weekend of some sort, more of a magazine style, if you will, without some of the glossy muss and fuss. But I think that it really does serve that role where no other media truly does. We take more time with print. We want to be more thoughtful about print. It's not about the urgency anymore, which is obviously being represented by digital.
Okay. Claudia Barry, the chair of our program committee, solicited questions from members of the committee to ask, and I'd like to ask some of these questions and then open it up to the rest of you. But one of the questions a committee member submitted was this one, and this is for you, Ben. What effect is social media and bad actors having on our journalism and reporters today? How do we as the public verify the sources of information that we are getting to ensure that we are getting accurate information and not mis or disinformation?
Well, that's, we have a couple hours.
You're an editor, you know how to compress.
Yeah.
Or should.
The first part of, the social media's impact, I think humans have a desire for information, our rational minds. We want to know things. We have a natural curiosity. In short, I think the social media is somehow scratching that itch for too many people. They think they're getting information when they're really not getting good information, shall we say, to be polite. I see Facebook groups. I joined it because I had to monitor for something I was involved in, like Holland Informed or Zealand Informed. I call them Zealand Uninformed. Somebody will ask a question that used to be would have been in your daily newspaper, trash pickup, or when's the, and you'll have 6 different answers, people just guessing randomly what they think the answer might be. That's one example. But so people through social media think they're getting informed, but they're not. So how do you solve that? No. People need to analyze the source. If it's just somebody's opinion, go, on trash pickup, go to the township website. I mean, there's ways you can verify it and do that on a higher level. When somebody's talking about vaccinations, dare we mention it, go to a legitimate website. Don't go to some quack site. And you can analyze sites and do that. It comes down to understanding the sources. Newspapers, when we were editing stories, we'd have 3 or 4 different people edit them back in the day. And if I was, for a number of years, with the night desk in Grand Rapids, if a story didn't have multiple sources from multiple points of view, it got held. That doesn't happen in the immediacy of online now, but readers can do the same thing. Analyze who's being quoted in the story, where is the information coming from, and you really owe it to yourself to analyze what it is you're looking at. I guess that's as close as I can summarize it.
Yeah, I think that back in the 50s and the 60s, we had these television, anchors that were just legendary, and they were the gatekeepers of information. And if it came out of their mouths, then it was something that we could rely on. But now, in the current era, we are all individually the gatekeepers of information, and that's a really uncomfortable ask of every citizen, because we're not all prepared to do that. And you have to question, you have to be a skeptic. You can't just blindly accept anything just because, Susie Smith down the street, who seems like a nice person, tells you something, Sometimes you have to question people that you know and respect, and that's not always easy.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, how does one distinguish between real news and opinion news?
Wow.
I thought it was going to say fake news, but it says opinion news.
So I get this. I get these comments a lot where somebody will read something on the opinion page and then they'll send in an angry email saying, well, where was the other side? Well, opinions of their very nature are not necessarily based on fact. They're based on feelings and interpretations, and they don't, as long as there's not inaccurate information that are in those expressions, then it passes our publication test. I think that people often become confused by that concept. I think that because they disagree with somebody, they tend to think that to project back onto the paper or the source to say, well, you shouldn't have ran it because A, I don't agree with it, but what I'm going to say is, where was all this other stuff that I think should have been in there, and that what I think this person should think and feel. So, in the opinion page, we very clearly put disclaimers on the page. We make sure that people understand that we are not endorsing any of this stuff. You have to pay attention to those cues and just understand that people are allowed this space to express themselves, even if you disagree with it, because again, to your point earlier, this is all about contributing to civil discourse. It's uncomfortable at times, and it's supposed to be. It challenges us all to see what other people think and feel, and to either accept it, process it, accept it, reject it. And I think that people that argument has now bled over into news reporting, where people look at an article and say, well, I don't think that the health department should be issuing state orders about COVID. Well, I'm sorry that angers you, but the fact that it happened, we have to put into a news article to tell people what's going on. So people tend to react emotionally and then project that back onto what the factual nature of content gathering is on the news pages. So really, it's more people have to kind of look within themselves and think, okay, take a deep breath. Is this news, or is it somebody just expressing their opinion? If it's somebody expressing their opinion clearly, then I will react to it in that way. And I really hope that everybody is listening, because I would like fewer emails like that.
Okay, Ben, or either of you can take a shot at this one. How can print media compete with the immediacy of online distribution?
Well, again, it goes back to what we mentioned a little earlier. It's going to be a different type of information, I think, that you'll want to look for from your print media. This discourse, letters to the editor that have been vetted to be at least based in fact, and reality. Thoughtful opinion pieces, and then on the news side, more in-depth stories that might analyze an issue and get those multiple voices in there. The next day's football score, or the fact that the city council voted even on something, is going to be immediate. That's going to happen on the internet. But where you want to sit and read something, and something that's been digested, I think print is the perfect medium for that.
To whom does the responsibility of separating fact or fiction fall? The press or the people? Sarah?
Ultimately, the people. But I think that journalists have a responsibility to present information that is accurate to the best of their ability and has context to the best of their ability to provide to the reader. So the way that I like to frame it is, we don't tell the readers what to think, we tell them what to think about. It's ultimately up to you guys to decide whether or not you're accepting what you're reading and whether or not you agree with what is going on. We have to just provide you the events, the context, the background, and potential analysis. But ultimately, it's up to the citizens to decide how they think and feel about it.
Okay. Ben, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I think, it really does come down to the audience, which is a little scary, I guess, given the level of the general discourse. And like I say, people think they're being informed when they're not necessarily. You go back to Thomas Jefferson and the belief in the rational mind and all of that good stuff that we studied back in graduate school and so on. You have to have a little bit of faith in humanity, which sometimes is hard to come by. You're the expert on Thomas Jefferson, Mel.
We'll show a clip of him later.
Yeah.
I had to work him in,
When the internet started, it still is that way, one of the things I studied way back in the day, in one of my graduate papers, was on the frontier newspapers, which were a scary bunch. And if you think that's what was around during the colonial times and so on, they were opinionated, they were partisan, they were vicious, they were very commercial. All the things you can say about the internet, right? And yet, the founding fathers and mothers put their belief in the freedom of that expression, trusting the audience to read it. We're very much in the same state with the internet that we were with those frontier newspapers. So I guess faith in the readers, right, Sarah?
Here's
Or
hoping.
trust.
Sarah, should news be free? What do you think of increased subscription prices?
Yeah, that's
It's
so.
already happened.
Okay, let's talk
Keeps
about
happening.
the internet. Yeah, I think that one of the big miscalculations early on when the internet came around was having articles up there for free. And media companies took a long time to realize that calculated error. So as print advertising declined, digital advertising was not replacing it in step. And that still holds true today. Digital advertising is not going to be replacing the boon that was print revenue. So now it's all, to Ben's point earlier about page views and clicks and all of that, that was a fad for a while. Now the focus is on digital subscribers. So they still want to go back to that tried and true subscriber model. And now you're seeing a nuanced approach to some of these paywalls. Paywalls are unpopular because we gave the cow away for free for a long time, and then we put in these very strict paywalls, or sometimes you get 3 clicks per month and then you hit the paywall. So one of the things that media companies are doing now is they have this mixed model where there are some free articles. COVID actually saw a lot of paywalls fall, where we were just trying to get out urgent information to people's health. We have the ability to go outside of the paywall in the newsrooms so that we don't have to go through this laborious process of getting approval. But then the regular measured model, we call it metered content, is when you get these arbitrary certain clicks per month and then you hit a paywall until the next month rolls around. And then there's subscriber-only content, which we've found some really interesting success with, where we go in these more deep dive pieces. There's not necessarily vital information, but it's information that you're not really necessarily going to get anywhere else. You might get the results of the city council vote from the previous night, but if you want to really see the entire backstory, and we talked to 10 additional people, and we really flesh this out in this whole, analysis perspective on it, then we might mark that as subscriber only, where you have to be a subscriber in order to access it. And actually, people are willing to pay for premium content, and a lot of companies are following that model. So I think that is working. I think that it's still going to take some time because we have done some damage by some miscalculations over the past 10, 15 years, but I think that we're on the right track now.
Yeah, it does come down. Even Tom's Banyan Project involves people being willing to pay for good information. It's a challenge,
Yeah, you have to. We have a joke in the newsroom, reporters don't eat air. So it's like, at some point we have to have money from somewhere in order to pay people to be trusted to go to all of the city council meetings and file those Freedom of Information Act requests and go pour through documents and spend hours and hours in places that readers don't want to be. They want to have other people go do that for them so that they can get just the bottom line, the gist. But that takes time and resources.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe you have the same reaction when you see on Facebook somebody complaining about hitting a paywall on a story that somebody links to. It's like, do these same people drive through at McDonald's and take their food for free? It's somebody has to do the hard work, and journalists need to get paid if you want quality.
I have a few more questions on the list that Claudia sent me, but before we get to them, I'd like to open it up to the people in the room. We have about 15 minutes before we need to end this. So are there any questions, comments, observations you'd like to make? Judy?
To Sarah, I really appreciate what you did ahead of our primary election with that special that you put forth, I think it was a Sunday paper, about Ottawa Impact. I learned so much from that. And I'm wondering if you had the wherewithal to do what you would like to do as an editor of the Holland Sentinel, what other features would you be working on right now?
Oh, I would do so much. Yeah, I love reporting, and that story, I had actually 2 more reporters than I do right now. Right now, I only have 2 reporters in the Holland newsroom. And I really, even at full staff, we have 4. So when I did that story, I didn't really have the time to do it, but I picked away at it, and I know that I can leverage my position sometimes. It has its advantages where people are willing to talk to me and not necessarily somebody that is on my staff that they don't know. And we can talk at length where I can reassure them that they can trust me with their comments. If I had the time and the wherewithal to be able to do more, I would be following that story a lot more closely, because I think that there's going to be a lot of repercussions about that election. I think that it got brought to light too late in order to really have much effect on that election, and I think that we're in for a very painful next 6 months. However, I think that might turn out to be a good thing, because I think that people might finally realize that they should be paying attention to some of these things and vetting some of these ideas that candidates come forth with, realizing that they're unrealistic, that you can't just eliminate a health department, because the health department does more than just issue, COVID-19 orders or mask mandates. They inspect restaurants so that you don't die. There's a lot of things about government that I think that hopefully this opens up people's eyes to say, oh gosh, that was a terrible idea. Maybe we should be, having people with a little more experience and a little bit more wisdom coming in and making these decisions. So I think it's going to be bad for a while, but then I think it's going to be kind of better. And if I could write more stories like that, and if you guys know of more stories like that, I will do my best to try to report on them.
Hi. Is this on? Okay. I know Ben. We've had a lot of discussions over the years. Ron and I actually know the Butlers. And if anybody's a long-term Holland resident, they'll know Bill Butler, who was a somewhat difficult owner of the newspaper. But running for office, I have to disagree with you, Ben, that in the 80s and the 90s, my district, depending which office I ran for, went all the way to Jennison. And I'd do the retail politics, which is knocking on the doors. And I did that for months. And I'd always ask, where do you get your news? Because people would come to the door and I'd talk about this election, and it was like, and I'd say, where do you get your news? Well, we don't take the newspaper. This was in the 80s and the 90s. Yeah. And once in a while, they'd take the Sunday paper because of the coupons.
Yeah.
And that was really tough, because not only were people of a certain age group not getting newspapers, but then the newspapers stopped printing details of like what was in the legislation. So you got these general comments about what was passed or not passed, but you never knew exactly what the particulars were. So it's been coming a long time.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And maybe we ought to put coupons in every paper. I mean, really good ones.
Yeah.
For food.
Yeah.
But I'd like your comment on that, because I know you, Ben.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned Bill Butler, right?
Yeah, and I knew Bill
I thought
Butler.
I heard you say his name. He was the publisher of the Sentinel when
He was the owner.
and the owner when I started out, 60 years ago, more than that. He was cheap.
Yeah. Well, he
He
was.
paid
I think
me,
they all are.
He paid me $1 an hour.
Aren't all owners cheap?
And
$1 an hour?
dollar
You were
an
well
hour.
paid for
That was in 58.
Back
I
in the
was
day.
a senior in high school.
You were probably paid
I
more
was
than
a
your...
co-op student, and he raised me to $1.05 after the first year.
I just want to say one more thing about Bill Butler. They lived across the street from us when we lived on that street at the time. And he'd come home from work and fully dressed, I mean, in a suit and hat. And he'd get his hedge clippers out, and there we would stand clipping his.
Yeah.
He could have paid somebody, but he didn't.
Well, his daughter, Shar, and I were classmates in high school, and yeah.
Well, if I,
Good
yeah,
friends.
to address, I appreciate
Sorry.
your comments. Yeah, no, that's a point that I was going to mention. Some of us on the news side, as we call it, maybe we're slow in realizing that people read the newspaper or get the newspaper for more than news. They get it for the advertising and the coupon, and that's fine. I mean, that's a purpose. And in paging through, looking at the ads, we trust that they also read about the Lansing and the legislature and things like that.
It's good to put at the bottom of the birdcage, too.
And they think. But in paging through it, you saw things maybe you didn't know you were interested in. Which is an important function of a newspaper that you don't necessarily get on the internet, because there they feed you more of the same, right? We know that problem. So, no, and because advertisers have abandoned, it's not just because they're not paying the ad rates, people don't have another reason not to get the newspaper. You're not getting the revenue, you're not getting the readers. So that's another part of the many things we could list that have hit the decline of newspapers. And I agree that decline has been long in coming. It started in the 90s already, early in the 90s. But at the time, there was still enough, I refer to it as a golden age, because we were still making enough money to have staff. I mean, for a while there, Holland, when the Lakeshore office opened in 1985, before that, the Sentinel was pretty much running wire copy and so on, very little local news, some sports, Leo and all that good stuff. I remember him. But we both upped our game when we came to town. I had 5 full-time reporters and 15 freelancers, and we had every meeting covered. And the Sentinel did too. So you had 2 reporters, you had multiple sources. It was great for Holland for a good, from 85 to say 95, late 90s, things, Holland had the best. There were very few places in the country that had that thorough coverage, with 2 daily newspapers competing vigorously. A story I mentioned earlier when we were chatting, you might remember the big uproar when the truck stop came in out on 16th Street, and the neighbors were all up in arms. Well, that's a problem. People weren't paying attention, but partly because we didn't have 2 reporters at every planning commission meeting to see that that was on the agenda and people become aware of it. So when it affects their lives, people are suddenly interested. Well, unfortunately, the newspaper has to operate every day and have enough revenue, enough reporters to do that. And we've come a long way from 85, I guess is what I'm saying.
Sometimes you do report on it, and people don't
Don't.
pay attention.
Yes, yeah.
And then they're mad about it, and then they say, why didn't you tell me? And we say, we did. But you didn't take the paper.
We have this basket on our kitchen counter at home, which is kind of a catch-all, and my wife was going through it yesterday and found this old copy of the Sentinel from July 19, with a banner across the top. 1/3, I feel like Harry Truman holding up, Dewey beats Truman. 1/3 of newspapers are expected to be gone by 2025. Help us make sure this isn't one of them. July 19. So, Sarah, why has the Holland Sentinel appeared to, I'm reading the question here, appeared to remain successful while other publications have gone out of business?
Well, I think that, to Ben's point earlier, it's part of the town itself, the city itself, the dynamics, its adjacency to Grand Rapids. It's a successful city. That always helps when you have a town that has a demographic of affluence that helps support things like local media. I think that it is also, we had a legacy of some really good competition to Ben's point. Some of the people who worked in the Lakeshore Bureau ultimately ended up working at the Sentinel. There was a lot of crossover. Ben and I actually worked together for 3 years. I was his managing editor before he retired. And so we had some really decent people that had a lot of wisdom and memory. I think that is a huge component of why some smaller papers are being lost to the sands of time, is that you're losing the people that have been around for a long time. I've only been there for 13 years, but so I know that I'm not necessarily, I don't have the elephant memory quite yet, but I realize that as I have new people cycling in and out, and they might only come to work with us for 3 or 4 years, they don't know the context of all of these different issues and all these backstories and things that happened 10 years ago and 5 years ago. And those things are important, and you have to have those kinds of people present. So I think that the Sentinel is successful because it was able to keep on hold of those people for longer than traditional smaller markets. And I think that we have some really great people who are very invested. I'm not shooting my own horn, but I passionately believe in what I do. Much to the detriment of my personal life, where my poor kids are like, "Are you still on the computer?" I believe in what we do. I think that it is absolutely vital, and it would not be worth the blood, sweat, tears, and time away from my kids if it didn't mean something. I think that this absolutely is one of the most important things that we can be doing to serve our communities.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on, certainly encouraging. One more question?
Okay. Sarah, we have our absentee ballots. There are a ton of names on there that we have absolutely no idea what their agendas are, or how we should vote.
Which district are you in?
Pardon?
Which district are you in?
I know Freedom Village is in town.
Freedom Village.
So what we're going to do is we have some questionnaires out to some people for the primary election now. We're going to be running those as they come in, but we are going to be doing a primer ballot. I don't know how long you want to wait, but if you want to fill out your ballot sooner rather than later and get it taken care of, you can go to a couple of websites that are able to explain exactly all of the information that you want at your fingertips. We're just not quite there yet, and I can give you that information after the discussion.
Thank you. Well, I think it's time to wrap this up. It's almost 10:30. Thank you for your questions. I promised we would show you a clip of Thomas Jefferson. Couldn't get through without it. This is a short clip from Inventing America, the show we filmed here at Hope College for PBS a few years ago. This is from episode 3 about the Bill of Rights, where Jefferson talks about the First Amendment and the role that newspapers play in our democracy. Our own Fred Johnson is the moderator, and Bill Barker plays the part of Jefferson. So let's take a look.
What is your take on the First Amendment, and how important is it to a democracy like ours?
I thank you, Dr. Johnson. I hope that I had emphasized how worthy our First Amendment is earlier, recognizing those inherent rights that are given to the family of man, not by any government, not by any ruler, those rights that are given to man by nature, nature's God, the first and foremost amongst them, to hold an opinion freely and to freely express one's opinion. And that, of course, allows for the freedom of the press. Now, that is not to say that all newspapers print the facts. No, I would agree they do not, because certain newspapers become known as tabloids. They are the ones you cannot depend upon. They are the ones who print, what would you call it, fake news, twistifications of the facts, deceits and lies, and yet, citizens, you are free to peruse them as you choose. So I would be concerned, citizens, about preferring a tabloid over a newspaper that you can depend upon. And therefore, Dr. Johnson, as I have written and pronounced once more, were it left to me to decide whether we should have this nation with a government and no newspapers, or have this nation with newspapers and no government, I would not hesitate a moment but to accept the latter. Who must be informed? Who must make up their minds to what they read in the newspaper? What American citizen would ever seek to satisfy solely themselves by reading one newspaper that prints only what they want to read, without reading the opposite opinion, and then make up their mind for what is best for everyone? It is an ancient adage, citizens, wherever the press is free, the people will be free. Thank you.
So thank you. If there's any conclusion to be drawn from this, it's that things really haven't changed that much. We can take some comfort in that. Want to thank our distinguished panelists, Sarah Leach, Ben BEVERSLUIS. It's been a good hour. Next month, our guest speaker will be Gleaves Whitney, the former director of the Hollenstein Center for Presidential Studies at Grand Valley State University. He is now the executive director of the Gerald Ford Museum and Foundation in Grand Rapids. And he will talk about the state of American democracy. Basically, the same topic we talked about today, but in a broader sense, and this will be a week before the midterm election. It couldn't be more timely. So tell your friends, and we'll see you next month. Thank you again.